October 12, 1934. Inside the Germania Club in Manhattan, a 350-pound enforcer stepped forward, ready to shut down one man from Harlem. In just 5 seconds, the entire tone of the room changed. This wasn't about anger or pride, it was about pressure, control, and territory. A Harlem figure faced down one of the most dangerous machines in New York and walked out alive. So what exactly happened in that room that left Dutch Schultz's empire frozen? To answer that, we have to go back to where it started. Harlem, 1934, 7:45 in the evening, Lenox Avenue. The air had a sharp bite to it, and the sidewalks were still damp from an afternoon rain that never fully dried. People moved quickly under dim streetlights, holding their collars tight. Then, word spread fast, faster than any newspaper ever could. Dutch Schultz had sent a message to 135th Street that it wasn't words. It was a warning. A bank clerk who worked for Stephanie St. Clair was grabbed on his way home, 3 men, an alley, and a lesson. By the time they left him, he couldn't move his hands. In his coat pocket, someone had tucked a piece of paper. Just 3 words: Bumpy Johnson, Germania Club, 9 p.m. The note reached Bumpy at a bar on Lenox. He was sipping red wine. That tasted more like old wood than grapes. A 17-year-old runner delivered the message, nervous, quiet, eyes heavy with things no teenager should have seen. Bumpy opened the note, read it once, folded it again, and placed it beside his wine glass. He didn't react, just silence. "You know what this means?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the runner replied. "Mr. Schultz wants you downtown," he said quietly. He said, "If you don't come, St. Clair's people will keep getting hurt until there's no one left." Bumpy took one last sip. "Tell me what happened to the clerk." "Everything." The runner's voice dropped. They started with his left hand, pinky first, then worked their way across. When they finished, they did the right. People in the building above could hear him scream. Bumpy nodded slowly, eyes still calm. "How old are you?" 17. "You ever seen someone get their fingers broken?" No, sir." "Well, now you have." That's what Dutch calls a message. From the back of the bar, a Duke Ellington record began to play. Smooth saxophone notes drifted into the room like a quiet warning. Bumpy stood up and pulled on his coat. A man 2 stools down spoke without turning his head. "You're not really going, are you?" "That's a setup." Bumpy fastened his coat, slow and steady. "I know what it is." "Then send word back neutral ground. Or don't go at all." Bumpy turned and looked him dead in the eye. "If I don't go, Harlem thinks I'm scared." "If Harlem thinks I'm scared, every street hustler with a pocket knife thinks I'm finished. If I send conditions, Schultz tells people I was too afraid to walk into his place. That's the same as not going. So I go, alone, and I walk out, or I don't. But either way, Harlem will know I didn't run." The man shook his head and went back to his drink. Before stepping outside, Bumpy turned to the runner still waiting by the door. "Tell St. Clair I'm handling this. Keep her people off the streets tonight. No one walks alone. If Schultz wants to make a point, I'd rather he try it with me, not someone who can't defend themselves." "Yes, sir." "What do I tell people about where you're going?" "You tell them I've got business downtown. That's all." The runner left. Bumpy stayed still for another few seconds. His mind wasn't racing, it was calculating. Like a chess player studying the board before touching a piece. He knew Schultz didn't need to speak to him. This wasn't a meeting, it was a performance. Schultz was striking at St. Clair and using Bumpy as the headline. The Germania Club was Schultz's playground. Every corner, every exit, every man inside answered to him. Walking in there with backup would look like a challenge. Walking in alone would send its own message. The bartender, an old man who'd been working that block since before Prohibition, quietly poured another glass and placed it in front of Bumpy. "On the house," he said. "You might need it." Bumpy looked at the glass but didn't touch it. "You think I'm walking into something I can't walk out of?" The bartender wiped the counter with a tired rag. "I think Dutch doesn't send invitations unless he wants to prove something. And when a man like that wants to prove something, usually somebody pays for it." Bumpy stared ahead steady. "Then I better make sure it's not me. How are you going to do that?" The bartender asked. "He's got 50 men in there. You're one man, walking in with nothing but your name." Bumpy's jaw tensed. "Reputation's all I need," he said. "Because if I pull a gun, I'm gone before I get the safety off. If I throw a punch, I'm done before it lands. The only way I leave Germania on my feet is if Schultz starts thinking twice about what happens if I don't." He paused. "And the only way to do that is to walk in calm, so calm that he starts wondering what I know that he doesn't." The bartender just shook his head. "You're betting everything on psychology." "I'm betting that Schultz is smart enough to realize killing me causes more problems than it solves. He wants Harlem to fall in line. If he kills me, Harlem fights back. If he humiliates me and lets me walk, Harlem might fall in line without. A shot fired, so he'll try to shake me, break me. And as long as he's trying to break me instead of bury me, I still have a chance." Bumpy left the second glass of wine untouched and stepped out into the cold October air. The chill hit him hard. Somewhere nearby, a woman shouted in Spanish, her voice bouncing off the brick walls. A car rattled by with a broken muffler, engine coughing like something out of breath. 75 minutes until 9 o'clock. 75 minutes to enter a room designed to shrink him down. 75 minutes to flip a trap into a draw. Because a draw was the best-case scenario. When your opponent already held all the pieces, Harlem didn't know what was coming. But Harlem knew this. Bumpy Johnson wasn't running. He was walking straight towards something that would either cement his name or erase it. The fragile order holding Harlem together was about to get tested. Not just by words or threats, but by scars people would carry even if they weren't in the room. The only question left? Whether Bumpy understood the game well enough to stay on the board. 8:40 p.m. He stood outside 173 East 3rd Street. No sign, no lights, no hint of what the building was. Just a door. 2 men stood in front of it like they were guarding a vault. Both were German, built like they'd been carved from stone. One had a knife scar that ran ear to jaw. He looked Bumpy over. "Name? Bumpy Johnson." The taller one checked a clipboard, found the name, gave a subtle nod. The door opened. Smoke, old wood, and something else, something that smelled like years of intimidation, poured into the street. Inside, the hallway was tight, narrow, the kind of place built to make people feel watched. The lights glowed yellow, turning faces pale and eyes hollow. The smoke moved when you breathed. Bumpy's footsteps echoed off the floor. Each one counted. Somewhere deeper inside, jazz played soft, distant, like it was underwater. The rhythm just slightly off, like a heartbeat with a skip. The guard led him to a door at the end of the hallway. 2 knocks. Pause. 1 knock. The door opened. 15 men. Standing loose but watching. Like they'd been waiting for the show to begin, and he was by the door. A younger guy with slicked back hair and his slightly off-fitting suit smirked. "You must be the guy from Harlem," he said. "The one who thinks he can tell Mr. Schultz how things work." Bumpy looked at him flatly. "I'm the guy from Harlem. Who are you?" The smirk dropped. "I'm the guy who gets to watch what happens when people forget their place." "And what place is that? On your knees, begging Mr. Schultz not to do to you what we did to that clerk. Heard about that?" He leaned in, proud. Every finger, both hands, Took 5 minutes. Screamed loud enough to wake the block. That's how messages work. Tonight, you're the message. Bumpy didn't respond. He walked right past him, stopped at the center of the circle. Nobody offered a seat. Nobody shook hands. Just the sound of quiet breathing and muffled jazz in the background. An older man, maybe 50, gray at the temples, cold eyes, stepped forward. He looked like someone who'd done dark things long enough that they didn't feel dark anymore, just necessary. You know where you are? I do. You know what happens here? I can guess. Then you know whether you walk out depends on how the next 20 minutes go. Schultz doesn't call people down here for polite talks. He calls them to make examples, and tonight, that's you. Bumpy's jaw moved, but his voice stayed flat. If he wanted to make an example, he'd have done it in Harlem where people could see. He called me here because he wants something, and he thinks threats are the way to get it. The older man gave a smile, cold, not amused. You think you know how this works? Because you run some numbers and people say your name in Harlem? That's not leverage. Leverage only works if both sides have something to lose. He stepped closer. You? You've got everything to lose, Mr. Schultz. Nothing. That's not a negotiation. That's you standing in a room with 15 men who'd follow one order. And the only reason they haven't done it yet, the man said, is because Mr. Schultz hasn't given the word. Then why am I still standing? Bumpy asked. Because Mr. Schultz wants you to leave here tonight with something clear in your mind. Harlem belongs to him now. The banks, the numbers, the protection, all of it. And if you, or Miss St. Claire, or anyone else thinks you can run a business without paying tribute, then what happened to that clerk is just the beginning. Bumpy stood motionless in the center of the circle. He didn't look around, didn't flinch, didn't ask where Schultz was. He stood like a man who had already played out the scenario and accepted the odds. That quiet stillness started to work. On the men around him, in the back, one of the heavies leaned in and whispered, "Why isn't he scared?" The guy beside him shrugged. Maybe he's just not that smart. Then how's he running Harlem? The shrug turned into a pause. Maybe he knows something we don't. The whisper passed through the circle like a crack through ice. Bumpy had walked into a trap built to crush him. But instead of folding, he stood calm enough to make them question whether the trap would work at all. Then footsteps. Slow, firm. Deliberate. The door opened. Dutch Schultz walked in, dressed like someone who'd already decided the outcome. His suit cost more than what most families in Harlem made in a year. He looked at Bumpy like a man reviewing a problem he already knew how to solve. "You made it," Schultz said flatly. "Didn't think you'd actually show." Bumpy met his eyes. "You said be here, so I'm here." Schultz began to circle him, slow and steady, close enough that Bumpy could smell the cologne and the smoke on his coat. "You know why you're here? You want to talk about Harlem. I want to make sure you understand Harlem is mine. Every dollar that changes hands up there belongs to me. Every runner, every protection deal, every dollar that flows, it flows because I allow it. And if I decide tomorrow that I don't want you or Miss St. Clair in the picture, you disappear. Not because I ask, but because I don't give you the choice." Bumpy kept his hands in his coat. Calm. "If you wanted me gone," he said, "wouldn't be standing here. You called me in to say something. So say it." Schultz stopped in front of him, close, silent for a beat. "I brought you here to show what happens when people forget who runs this town." He turned, raised a hand. From the back, a figure moved, large, heavy, broad enough to block a doorway. A man whose name was Tiny, not because he was small, but because cruel jokes tend to stick. He stepped into the light. Every man in the room stepped back, except Bumpy. Schultz gave a quiet smile. The kind you make when you think the game is already won. This is Rocco. He handles the hard conversations. And tonight, you're the one we're speaking to. Schultz pulled a chair into the middle of the room and sat, slow and relaxed, like a judge settling in. He lit a cigar with a gold lighter. The sharp flick of the flame was the only sound in the room. He took a breath, exhaled smoke, and locked his eyes on Bumpy, eyes that had seen people plead, panic, and vanish, and stopped caring long ago. "Let me explain how this city works," he said, voice calm. "The police work for me. I pay them more than the city does, and they listen. The judges, same story. When I need something gone, it's gone. When I need someone out of the way, they're out of the way. Politicians? I fund their campaigns. And they know better than to stop being useful." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, holding the cigar like chalk on a board, ready to underline the point. Harlem's part of the city. That means Harlem works for me. Every number, I get my cut. Every bank, I get a slice. Every store that wants to keep its lights on, they pay. And when someone thinks they can skip the arrangement, I send a message. He paused, like I sent one tonight. Bumpy didn't blink. "I heard." "Good," Schultz said. "Then you understand why you're here. You came downtown because I told you to. Not because I asked, because I told you. And you'll leave when I say not a second sooner." He stood again, walked around Bumpy, the cigar trailing smoke behind him like a shadow. "You're here to deliver a message to Miss St. Clair. Either she pays what's owed, or we keep going until there's no one left to collect her bets." He kept pacing. "You're not here to make a deal. You're not here to negotiate. You're here to listen," the man said, "to nod, and to understand your role. You're the messenger, that's all. And messengers who forget that usually deliver their last message with broken hands and no teeth." Bumpy didn't follow Schultz's pacing. He didn't turn to track him or flinch. He just stood, hands in his pockets, voice steady as stone. "Harlem's not something you take just because you feel like it." The room froze, not a whisper, not a shift. Every man in the circle just stopped watching. Waiting. Schultz stopped too. Turned toward Bumpy, his face caught between a smirk and a scowl, like someone unsure whether to laugh off a bad joke or punish the person who told it. "What did you just say?" "I said Harlem isn't something you take. It's not a wallet to lift, not a shop to lean on. It's a place with its own rhythm, its own rules. And those don't change just because you want a bigger piece." Schultz's eyes narrowed. "You think I care about rules?" He said, "I make the rules. I am the order. And if Harlem doesn't see that yet, they will. We'll keep showing them until the message sticks." Bumpy didn't back off. "You can try. But understand this, every time you take, it costs you. Every time you hurt someone, you gain enemies. And when folks stop caring about safety, they start caring about payback. You're not scaring people. You're teaching them that losing everything's already on the table. That's when people stop backing down." Schultz stepped closer. "Is that a threat?" "No," Bumpy replied. "That's what comes next. You want Harlem? You'll get it. But it'll cost more than you think. And by the time you figure that out, stepping back will make you look weak. So you decide now, do you want to make money or prove a point? Because proving a point gets expensive. And I don't think you're as rich as you act." The silence that followed held weight. It hovered, tight and heavy, waiting to tip, either toward action or toward something worse. Schultz studied him, gears turning behind his stare, trying to decide what Bumpy was, foolish, fearless, or something deeper. Someone who knew how to play a game that hadn't been laid out on the table yet. Then Schultz laughed. But it wasn't humor. It was more like a test, a warning. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that," he said. "Walking in here and talking like you've got leverage. But nerve doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't stop him." He turned. "To the room? You know what I hate?" Schultz asked, raising his voice. "I hate people who forget their place. I hate when someone from uptown strolls into my space like we're on equal ground." He looked around. "We're not equals. I own cops. I own judges. I own politicians. What do you own? A couple blocks in loyalty from folks too broke to matter?" Right on cue, the room laughed, sharp, cold. The kind of laughter that wasn't shared, it was performed. Schultz took another drag from his cigar, then looked at Bumpy with something colder than anger. Not hate, not pity, just dismissal. "You want to know why you're here? I brought you to see it, to feel it, so you can run back to St. Clair and deliver the message. That patience has a limit, and I've hit mine." He paused, letting that sit, then finished with the kind of line designed to bruise deeper than fists ever could. "People like you need to remember your place." "And your place," he said, voice dropping, "is not at this table, not in this room. It's wherever I say it is." The temperature in the room dropped. Men shifted on their feet, not from discomfort but anticipation. Something was about to happen. They could feel it. And whether it would be a warning or a spectacle depended on what Bumpy did next. Schultz didn't need to yell. He didn't bark an order, just gave a slight nod, and that's all it took. From the shadows, he stepped forward. Rocco. The floor groaned beneath him like the wood hated the weight. He was massive, built like a wall, scarred like one too. His eyes were flat, unreadable, and not interested in conversation. He stopped 3 feet from Bumpy, looked him over like a problem he'd already decided how to solve. "Too small," he muttered. "I break you like dry wood." Schultz leaned back in his chair, smiling with that same unbothered ease. The cigar hung from his lips like a signature on a decision already made. "Rocco's going to teach you something," Schultz said. "Something about respect. And when he's done, you'll crawl back to Harlem and explain to your people how things work now." 60 seconds. That's how much time Bumpy had left before the room turned. 60 seconds to decide if words were still an option or if survival now depended on something else. The circle opened, like a mouth, ready to bite. The men stepped back smoothly, forming a ring around Bumpy and Rocco. They moved like they'd done this before, and chances are they had. This room wasn't new to watching someone get taught a lesson. Schultz leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, cigar resting between his teeth. He looked like a man about to enjoy something he'd paid for in advance. Rocco cracked his knuckles, slow and loud, then rolled his neck until it popped. He gave Bumpy a grin that didn't mean kindness. "One hand's all I need," Rocco said. "You're too small for two." The floor creaked beneath him. Even the men in the circle shifted. Rocco wasn't just big. He was built in a way that turned weight into impact. A wrecking ball in motion. From the side, the young guy with slicked back hair leaned in to whisper, 10 seconds. "That's how long this lasts, maybe less. Rocco's gonna fold him like paper." Schultz raised his voice, calm but clear. "Try not to break him too much, Rocco. I want him to be able to crawl back to Harlem. Let them see what forgetting looks like." Rocco nodded once, then stepped forward. His right arm came up fast, aimed at Bumpy's throat. A grab like that could lift a man straight off the ground, but Bumpy moved, not a big move. Just a small pivot, 6 inches left. Rocco's hand closed. On air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance right into space Bumpy no longer occupied. "What the?" someone muttered in the circle. Then Bumpy struck. One short punch, no wind-up, aimed at the soft spot beneath the ribs, the kind of shot that didn't need to hurt to change everything. Rocco froze. His face lost color. Both hands went to his chest, searching for air that wasn't coming. His knees gave out. All 350 pounds dropped hard that his right knee hit the floor with a deep thud that shook the room. "Get up," Schultz snapped. "Rocco, get up." Rocco tried, but his body didn't listen. His lungs wouldn't fill. He stayed there, one knee down, one hand braced on the floor, breathing like someone who had forgotten how. The only sound in the room was his wheezing. The slick-haired kid stared in disbelief. "That's not possible. Nobody drops Rocco." The man beside him grabbed his arm. "Don't talk. Don't move." Bumpy took a step back, calm. His hands went right back into his coat pockets. "I told you," he said. "Harlem isn't something you take." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 15 men watched Rocco struggle for air. The enforcer they feared, the muscle that kept order, was now down on one knee, unable to rise. And right then, the story of Rocco the Unstoppable started to fade. Schultz stood. He walked over slow until he was standing next to the man who used to terrify the room. He looked at Rocco, then at Bumpy, and when he spoke, his voice was flat, cold. "Get him up." 2 men rushed to help. They lifted Rocco, but even standing, he swayed, like a building unsure if it could stay up. His breath was coming back slow and shallow. Schultz didn't say a word to him, just turned away, focused fully on Bumpy now. "Just made a mistake, did I?" Bumpy asked, steady. "You embarrassed me, here, in my house, in front of my people. You think that doesn't come with consequences?" Bumpy didn't flinch. "You called me here to make a point. I made one. 2. Now we both know where we stand." An older man in the circle, the one with silver at his temples, stepped forward. His voice was low, meant only for Schultz's ear. "Boss, if this gets out, that Rocco hit the floor, crews from the Bronx to Brooklyn will smell blood. We can't let this slide." Schultz raised a hand. The man fell quiet. He stared at Bumpy, and you could see it. The calculation, playing out like a chess clock ticking down. Take Bumpy out now? Harlem would explode? Let Bumpy walk? The story would spread that someone from Harlem put Rocco on his knees. Both moves cost something. The only question, which cost less? Finally, Schultz spoke. His words slow, measured, like they were being etched into marble. "Get out." Bumpy didn't move right away. "We done here? We're done for now. But listen carefully." He stepped closer again. "What happened in this room doesn't leave this room. Not a word. Not from you. Not from anyone." He pointed at the men around him without looking. "Because if I hear talk, if I hear that, Harlem's laughing about what happened here, I'll come up there myself. And I'll burn down every block you care about until there's nothing left. Are we clear?" Bumpy looked at him. Then at Rocco, still breathing heavy, still staring at the floor. "Clear." "Then get out, before I change my mind." Bumpy turned, walked toward the door. The circle opened without a word. No one stopped him. No one looked him in the eye. He left the room the same way he'd entered, calm, straight-backed, and when the door closed behind him, the silence that remained inside was louder than any noise that might have followed. Schultz stood still for a long beat, then turned slowly to the circle of men around him. His voice was low, controlled, and dangerous. "What happened here tonight stays here. Rocco slipped. That's the story. Anyone says different ends up in the river. Understood?" A few nods. A chorus of quiet voices. "Yes, boss." Schultz looked over at Rocco. He was finally on his feet, but barely. Like someone walking away from a car crash. "You let a man half your size put you on the floor. How does that happen?" Rocco's voice came out rough. Like it hurt to speak. He knew where to hit. "I've never seen someone move like that." Schultz didn't blink. I don't care how he moved. You're supposed to be the one nobody gets past. That's what I pay you for. That's the fear that keeps this whole thing in check. And tonight, in front of everyone, you went down. Do you understand what that means for me? Rocco clenched his fists, steadying himself. It won't happen again. It better not, Schultz said, stepping him closer. Because if it does, the only job you'll be doing is digging a hole big enough to fit yourself in. He turned away, walked back to his chair, picked up his cigar from the ashtray like it had never left his hand, took a long, slow drag, then spoke again. Quieter. Now, but somehow even heavier. That man walked into my place, dropped my best enforcer, and walked out. He let the words settle. The only reason I let him leave was because it cost less than the alternative. But don't fool yourselves, this isn't over. Harlem didn't win tonight. They just bought time, and time, he said, runs out for everyone. Schultz stood now in the center of the room. His voice wasn't loud, but every word carried like it had weight. No one talks about this. Not to your friends, not to your wives, not even to yourselves. What happened tonight doesn't exist. The men nodded, but Schultz wasn't finished. He walked slowly, making eye contact with each man as he passed. This isn't about pride, he said. It's about survival. What happens when the Bronx hears about it? When Brooklyn starts asking questions? You know what happens when people start thinking a boss isn't untouchable? He paused, then answered it for them. They get replaced. Not with a vote, with silence, with bodies in the river. He stopped in front of the young guy with the slicked back hair. So when you walk out of here tonight, you forget. Rocco slipped. That's the story. And if I hear anything else, if even a whisper comes back to me, whoever talked becomes the example of what happens when you forget how to stay quiet. Clear? Yes, boss. Schultz turned his eyes back toward the door, toward the memory of the man who had just walked out. You heard me, he said to the room, but really to Bumpy. You go back to Harlem, you don't talk, you don't brag. You don't tell St. Clair how you dropped Rocco, because if you do, I'll burn Harlem until there's nothing left to talk about. Behind those words was no theater, just quiet certainty. Bumpy had already left the building, but if he'd been there, he would have replied the same way he did earlier. I understand. And he did, because outside, in the October night, Bumpy didn't rush. The street was quiet just. A drunk asleep in a doorway. He walked 3 blocks before stopping under a street lamp, rested a hand against the wall, exhaled. He had held that breath since the moment Rocco dropped. He understood exactly what Schultz had done. He wasn't protecting Rocco. He was protecting perception, holding his reputation together with silence. Bumpy wasn't keeping quiet because he was afraid. He was keeping quiet because it was smart. Because if word got out, Schultz would have no choice but to respond, and that response would come with fire. People would get hurt, people who had nothing to do with that night. So Bumpy would stay silent, not out of fear, out of strategy. The effects of that night didn't come all at once. They spread slowly like cracks under pressure. Schultz didn't pull out of Harlem, but he stopped pushing. The attacks on St. Clair's network slowed. The street tax demands got quieter. The heat eased, not completely, but enough to notice. It wasn't surrender. It was a pause, a recalibration, a decision made in the interest of optics, not weakness. And the men who were in that room, they changed too. Some avoided Harlem altogether. Others got more cautious about how they spoke, who they pressured. Some just got quieter, like they were carrying a truth that weighed too much to share. Rocco was still around, still technically Schultz's man. But something in him had shifted. He stopped leading the hard jobs, Started doing collection work, quiet visits to people already too scared to resist. He talked less. Didn't make eye contact like he used to, and though no one said it out loud, everyone remembered. 3 weeks later, a Schultz lieutenant was at a bar in the Bronx when someone asked why Dutch had suddenly eased off. Harlem. The lieutenant had been there that night. He had seen the moment, heard the silence, knew the rule. So he lied. Too much heat? He said. Cops are sniffing around. Schultz is shifting his focus to Brooklyn. The man bought him a drink, and just like that, the lie became the truth. Schultz kept his reputation. Bumpy kept Harlem from burning. And the truth stayed locked in that back room on East 3rd Street, where 15 men watched something they weren't supposed to believe, and then agreed to act like it never happened. That wasn't about honor or loyalty. That was survival dressed up as silence. In the world these men lived in, survival was the only currency that mattered. The war didn't end that night, but the rhythm of it changed. Schultz didn't leave Harlem entirely. That would have looked like retreat, and retreat looked like weakness, but he slowed down. He stopped sending messages through broken fingers. He stopped trying to prove a point with every move, and in that quiet, St. Clair finally got some room to breathe. The heat backed off. The threats got softer. And Harlem, without saying a word, understood what had happened. Sometimes, one punch at the right time is enough to pull a whole community back from the edge. Bumpy Johnson didn't need applause. He didn't want the story told in bars or his name whispered with fear. He just needed the order to hold. And it did. Schultz still had a name outside Harlem because silence protected it. But after that night, every time he made a move, he had to factor in something new. Harlem didn't fold as easily as he thought, and it had someone willing to walk into a trap and walk out standing. That changed the math. Rocco lived, still worked for Schultz, but the myth of him being untouchable died on that floor. They kept using him, but not for the heavy jobs, not the ones that risked him having to prove himself again. He became background. The men in that room, they changed too. Some stepped away from big jobs. Some started picking smaller targets. Some stopped believing that size and reputation were enough because they'd seen something that couldn't be unseen. A smaller man, calm and smart, had dropped the giant. And that proof reshaped how they thought about power. The new order wasn't written in blood or sealed with handshakes. It was written in 5 seconds. A moment where timing, precision, and nerve rewrote the rules. Real power didn't come from being loudest or carrying the biggest stick. It came from discipline, from knowing when to strike and when not to. It came from letting your opponent ruin himself trying to protect an image that was already cracking. Schultz stayed dangerous. Harlem stayed tense, but something had shifted just enough to make survival possible. And in a world where most people didn't survive, possible was as good as winning. That's the real lesson of October 12th, 1934. Not that violence can always be avoided, not that the strongest always fall, but that sometimes if you're calm enough, fast enough, and sharp enough, you can walk into a trap and turn it into a draw. And a draw is the only win available to people who don't have armies behind them. This story is shared for historical insight and reflection. It does not promote violence or criminal behavior. If you've stayed with us to the end, thank you. These stories take weeks to research and write. If this one connected with you, if you see what Bumpy was really teaching about power, restraint, and protecting what matters, subscribe. Help us reach 1 million subscribers so we can keep telling the stories that matter. Stories about smart leadership, about real consequences, and about men who change the game without destroying everything in the process. The next video drops soon. Until then, remember, real power isn't what you can destroy. It's what you choose not T.O.